Hey everyone, welcome to the latest installment of The Way It Is, and I'm your host, Luca with Remax Service First Realty here in Kingston. I am, this is going to be a fairly somber podcast, I guess, or the tone will be certainly quite serious. And I have the pleasure of having a very distinguished guest with me, Professor Lubomyr Luciuk, who is a professor of hold on a second, I'm going backwards here, of geopolitics at RMC. He was, Mr. Luciuk was born and raised in Kingston, Ontario. He earned 2 degrees from Queen's University, an honors BSc in 1976 and a master's in 1979. He completed his PhD in 1984 at the University of Alberta. He has postdoctoral fellowships at the University of Toronto and Queen's University. He actually also served as a part-time member of the Parole Board of Canada from 2013 to 2016. And again, he's currently a full professor of political geography in the Department of Political Science and Economics at the Royal Military College of Canada. His awards are prestigious. He was one of 16 recipients of the Shevchenko Medal of the Ukrainian-Canadian Congress in recognition of his educational, research, and advocacy efforts on behalf of the Ukrainian-Canadian community. And on December 6th, 2019, he received the Cross of Ivan Mazpa, a Ukrainian presidential award presented in Kingston by His Excellency Andrei Shevchenko, Ukraine's ambassador to Canada. His publications are prolific and numerous, and I won't list them here because I've probably dragged on a bit too long, but thank you very much for coming, and I hope I pronounced some of those things correctly. So
you got it all right, except for Mazapa.
Yeah, I was struggling with that one. I really was. I was struggling.
And that one almost has an Iberian ring to it. So how could you blow that one? Thank you. That's a very fine introduction. I mean, I've done some things in my life, but a lot of it is due to all the support I've had from, my late parents, my sister, and a great community that I grew up in, Kingston. I mean, wow, what a place.
Yes. And I should add, you're the current president of the Ukrainian-Canadian chapter here in Kingston, correct?
Yeah. We have a Ukrainian-Canadian Club of Kingston. We've been around for many, many years now, of course.
Yes. Oh, no.
You well know.
Well, you're familiar with Mr. Tyranny, I'm sure, who's a longstanding solicitor here in Kingston, who I think he might have even been president at one time too. But so welcome. Thank you. First, let me start by asking if you have family in the Ukraine, and if so, have you been able to reach them? How are they doing?
No, I don't have direct family. Our family, of course, came to Kingston after the Second World War as political refugees in 1949. So both my sister Nadia and I were born here. We did have family, of course, as long as pretty much the Soviet Union lasted. By the time the Soviet Union thankfully collapsed in 1991, those family ties had, of course, considerably weakened simply through the passage of time. My mother still got back to Ukraine to see her mother, but it was, of course, late in both their lives. So there are no sort of very close family members, but I do have a lot of friends since the collapse of the Soviet Union, and even a little bit before. I was going to Soviet Ukraine and then Ukraine many times. And so I've met the new post-Soviet generation. I've made friends. I've been talking to friends in Kyiv almost daily now for the last several days. When I first got the news, so it was about 2:30 in the morning a few days ago when the phone rang and I was told that the Russians had launched a full-scale invasion. Pretty much I haven't been off, one platform or another for the last couple of days.
Well, no, I don't doubt that. So let's, for context, I guess, let's maybe go backwards before we go forwards. How did this even come to pass? I mean, what reasons, legitimate or otherwise, or fictitious, is Putin basing this on, I guess?
Well, the Russian war against Ukraine began in 2014. It became evident to Mr. Putin, I think, around that time that Ukrainians would not tolerate a kind of a creeping incorporation of Ukraine into the Russian sphere of influence, as he would call it. So in 2014, you may remember there were huge demonstrations across Ukraine when it became evident that the president at the time, Mr. Yanukovych, was taking Ukraine away from Europe and back toward Moscow. That was not what most people wanted. And so there was a popular revolution called the Revolution of Dignity, or the Euromaidan Revolution. It's quite a troubled time. Yanukovych then fled and took out Russian citizenship. So it says all you need to know about him. When you compare Yanukovych, who, some left-wing commentators say, well, that was a coup. All right. So Mr. Yanukovych flees to Russia. Okay. Takes out Russian citizenship. Hasn't said a word about what's happening now. Meanwhile, President Zelensky, who was the president who gave me the Cross of Ivan Mazepa, has told the Americans when they offered to airlift his family and him out of Kiev, out of harm's way, said, hey, I don't need transportation, I need ammunition, right? There's a difference between a Russian satrap and a Ukrainian patriot. Now, so in 2014, what happened was the Russians invaded Crimea, little green men as they were called, took control of Crimea. The government in Kyiv had been enfeebled for many years by the Yanukovych regime. They didn't really know what to do, and so Crimea was occupied. The Ukrainian troops there were withdrawn. Since then, of course, there's been something of a reign of terror, prejudice against Crimean Tatars, the indigenous population. Most Ukrainians have left. At the same time, February, March of 2014, the Russians invaded the southeastern portions of Ukraine, Luhansk, Donbass, that whole Donbass region, and have been continuing with a low-scale intensity war there for 8 years. I visited in 2017, so I was on the front line. I saw it for myself. Skirmishes, artillery duels, occasional raids, but nothing. Well, it was a war, people were dying, but it wasn't full scale. That's been going on now until the recent past, when Mr. Putin has been slowly, at first I thought rather brilliantly, ramping up the pressure, like a bully in a schoolyard. Give me your lunch money or I'll beat you up. So you give him your lunch money. Next day, give me your lunch and your lunch money or I'll beat you up. The next day, give me your sneakers or I'll beat you up, and so on. The only way around that, the only way to defeat that, frankly, is to get a group of people together and say, look, there's 6 or 7 of us. Yeah, you'll beat one of us up, 2 of us, and then we'll beat you up. Unfortunately, and I wrote this in the Globe and Mail, so I'm going to be very frank about what I think I did right and what I think I did wrong.
Sure.
About 10 days ago, I had a piece in the Globe and Mail in which I said, I think Putin has won the war. I said, I think he's won the war because he has demonstrated to the Ukrainians that not only does he have this seemingly superior military power, but that the Western world, broadly defined, is backing down. So NATO countries said, we're going to have a cordon sanitaire. This is our side of the wall. He won't come here. And Ukraine's on the other side. Well, here's a few guns. Here's a few missiles. Good luck, right? What we've seen, of course, in the last several days is that Mr. Putin underestimated the resiliency of the Ukrainian military. It's far more professional than it was in 2014. It's better equipped. It has high morale. And it has been, frankly, slaughtering Russian soldiers, many of whom are conscripts, many of them have no idea where they are. They're being stopped and told, who are you? Why are you here? Well, we're on exercises. They don't even know where they are, half of them. Wow. So it's a tragedy for them. I'm sorry. I'm a human being. I don't want to see 18, 19-year-olds killed, but sorry, you invaded, take the consequences. Mr. Putin underestimated, I think, most particularly, not just the military strength of Ukraine, but more importantly, the morale. Most of the people fighting him are battle-hardened veterans who've had 8 years of combat. A lot of Ukrainians have been at war, so they're not afraid. And secondly, they're post-Soviet. They're post-1991. Now, Mr. Putin is my age, right? So I kind of see in him, well, he's a richer man, and because he's corrupt, but he's also a thug. He's a killer, as Mr. Biden called him. He's also a man who has a Soviet vision. He said the collapse of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. Mirror image, Lubomyr Luciuk would say the collapse of the Soviet Union was the greatest joyful moment of the 21st century. Yeah. So we're kind of looking at each other almost from the other side of the mirror. And when I look at him, I go, what's he trying to do? He's trying to rebuild some kind of Russian-dominated Slavic empire, including Belarus, which has become a puppet state, as you've seen in the last few days, and including Ukraine. And it's not working. His victory speech was set to go. It was leaked. Bellingcat found it. It's just been published. And it's this delusional vision that, Russia will reemerge as a great state, that it will control Ukraine and Belarus, that these are all people of one blood, that they all belong together, dominated, of course, by our elder brother, Russia. This is a genocidal agenda. He's basically saying, I will erase Ukraine from the maps of the world. I will erase Belarus from the maps of the world. There are only Russians. Whereas in point of fact, historically, Russians came after Ukrainians. They are our younger brothers, although that's not the way that the narrative played out. So we're in a situation now where Mr. Putin has a very difficult choice ahead of him. He has been ostracized by the world. Russia has become an international pariah. It's suffering economically. The oligarchs are getting very antsy. Russian airspace, Western airspace has been closed to them. All of the governments of Europe have rallied behind Ukraine, providing more and more military hardware. President Zelensky is today addressing the European Union. I don't know what the consequence of that is about allowing Ukraine into the EU. And I think in time it will be allowed into NATO, probably sooner than later, given this. So NATO is stronger. The European Union is stronger. The European Union has gone beyond itself to actually provide military aid and hardware to support Ukraine. The Ukrainians are fighting hard. And Russia, and I'll try to be as objective as I can. Obviously, my passion's on one side of the fence. But sure. I always told my students at RMC for 30 plus years, anybody who's had my courses can tell you this, that Russia belongs in Europe. The Russia of Tolstoy, the Russia of Dostoevsky. Yes. These are great European authors. They were part of the European cultural sphere, broadly defined, in art, in literature, in religious beliefs, in poetry. How are Russians different than Frenchmen or Welshmen or Ukrainians or Brits? No, they're not. But this has severed Russia from Europe for a very long time to come. I think Mr. Putin has done more damage to Russia than even he understands. And it's because of his megalomania.
It's eerily Stalinesque almost.
Well, yeah, right? He's a great admirer of Stalin, and he's behaving like Hitler. He was using the Hitler playbook, staging provocations, saying that Ukrainians are Nazis. President Zelensky is Jewish. The Minister of Defense is Jewish by heritage, right? I'm not sure how faithful they are, but that's what they are. President Zelensky said, my father fought in the Red Army. 8 million Ukrainians died defeating Nazism. And you're calling us Nazis? You want to find a homophobe, an anti-Semite, someone who's against NATO, against the European Union, against liberal democracy? Look at the KGB man in the Kremlin, Vladimir Putin. His grandfather served Stalin personally. His father was in the NKVD, and he was a KGB officer. Give me a rest.
Yeah, then that's just it. That's, I've had these conversations. How do you solve that problem? How do you even rationalize with that brain? Anyway, we'll get.
I saw it was a kind of pithy photograph the other day, young man at a protest in Berlin, actually, wearing a placard. And the placard said, "Dear Mr. Putin, just skip to the last stage and put a bullet through your head in the bunker." Right?
Yeah.
This is a man who, he's not stupid.
No.
He's hugely corrupt. He is the president in perpetuity of something called the Russian Federation, which exists only on paper. There is a Russia, but then there are all sorts of other nations within that so-called federation that are essentially captive nations. Think of the Chechens and how they fought, right?
Yeah.
Think of what just happened in Kazakhstan and in the parts of the former Soviet Union, in Georgia in 2008. Yeah. So there are all sorts of nations in that region that want their independence and have tried to get it and have been suppressed. Many more within the Russian Federation itself. He wants Ukraine back because without Ukraine, Russia is, frankly, not very much. Ukraine is, one of the world's leaders in agricultural productivity. IT is the highest ends. There's all sorts of mining and industrial engineering, large uranium deposits, talented people want to return to their rightful place in Europe. And again, I want to emphasize this because I know what I can sound like sometimes, and particularly when I'm tired and going on about this stuff. The reality of it is, I prayed that Russia would join Europe because then Ukraine would be part of Europe and we wouldn't have this. So my vision of the Europe of 2022, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, was that it would be a European community, not without its problems, not without its irritants, but things that would be resolved in the European manner, in a consensus discussion and so on. And if somebody wanted to step out like Brexit, well, that's a fair choice. But nobody went to war and said, well, we're going to keep Britain in, right? I mean, people are angry about it, but that's, these are free decisions made by free societies. Instead, what we have is this man who has essentially destabilized Europe, threatened the peace of the world, acted almost as a satrap of Mr. Xi and the People's Republic of China, his great friend. I mean, who's supporting Putin when we look at it? Xi is actually being kind of standoffish. President Assad of Syria likes him, says it's all fine, right? So you get Assad in your camp. Because why? Well, because Putin bombed Syrian nation that had risen up and caused those enormous refugee flows, right? So who supports him? North Korea, Venezuela. Now, sadly, India and Brazil. Well, Brazil's kind of ruled by a strange character these days anyway. But India, which is the world's largest democracy, in which I visited several times, the Indians, who I greatly admire as a people, what a multilingual, multicultural society, and yet it somehow works, right? It's a model. It's a great model. I love it. I'm very fond of the peoples I've met in India. Unfortunately, they've sort of turned a bit of a blind eye to Putin's thuggery, and that's unfortunate. Brazil, you might almost expect it. Well, what do you expect from North Korea or Venezuela? But the rest of the world, Canada is increasing its supplies of military equipment, including anti-tank missiles. The Ukrainians still need counter-battery missiles that shoot down other missiles. Yeah, they need weaponry. But they're, as much as they would like to see Canadian or British troops, boots on the ground, the reality of it is Ukrainians are holding their own. What they need is logistical support, moral support from the world, political support. The United Nations should probably expel the Russian Federation. And people say, well, you can't do that. Yeah, you can. The League of Nations expelled the Soviet Union in 1939 because the Soviet Union had invaded Finland and had dismembered Poland in alliance with Nazi Germany. Today, we have an admirer of Stalin who's trying to dismember Ukraine, who's already threatened Finland. When Finland said the other day, we might join the European Union and NATO, Putin says, how dare you? We'll invade. I mean, so the Finns can't make up their mind. Sweden said they're thinking about joining NATO. Is he going to fight Sweden too? I mean, so in other words, do it my way, or I'll beat the living out of you, right?
Yeah. Well, and
so the lunatic.
Well, you're right. So that was one of my questions is, and you touched on it and alluded to some of the things, what more can the West or the world do? And I guess the given what you just stated, have they done enough? And what more is there to do? I guess that would really send a message. I mean, aside from
sending in the troops, yeah.
Well, which won't happen. That's not going to happen. So
Ukraine has now allowed for volunteers to come to form a foreign legion. I know one person is already there. People are going. There is a large contingent from Great Britain, a large contingent from Lithuania, a large contingent is already forming up here in Canada. I know that for a fact. So there are people who are willing to go and put their lives on the line to defend Ukraine, to defend Europe. Maybe we won't see NATO troops per se, but again, keep in mind that there is this kind of cordon sanitaire. So NATO does have troops in all of its countries. And then in front of them, in effect, are the Ukrainians who are fighting. They're fighting well. So what Ukraine needs are more weapons, political support, economic support. The ruble has collapsed, right? We know that. The Russian oligarchs are being squeezed. They don't like that. They are not as powerful as Putin and his KGB confederates, but push it too far and someone's going to put a bullet through Putin's head. It's as simple as that. That may very well be the way this ends. And quite frankly, again, I'm a believer. This is probably the wrong thing to say, but Godspeed the assassin.
Yeah, no, and so I think the other thing that Putin might have underestimated is the connectivity and the global nature of the planet now, and the fact that Russia, whether you want to keep it a federation and whether you want to keep it to yourself, the people's there, the state, everybody's linked together now. I mean, even, through the internet, through, how the world operates now, banking systems, the financial systems, all of it, right?
Amazing that I can literally spend, and I have done this for 3 or 4 days in a row now, 2 or 3 hours on a Zoom link, talking to my friend in Kyiv as the sirens are going off and the bombs are coming down and I can see it. I just got a wonderful video clip of a Ukrainian farmer driving down a road, and there's a Russian tank parked by the side of the road. And of course, most Ukrainians can speak Russian. He rolls down the window and says, "What's the matter, boys?" in Russian. And they say, "We've run out of gas." Right? And he says, "Would you like me to tow you back to Russia?" And then he says, "Do you know where you are?" And they go, "No, we haven't got a clue." And they're laughing. They're just young guys. They're 19, 20-year-olds sitting in a tank going, "What's going on?" So, you see this kind of stuff. I mean, then there's the photographs of that young girl that was just killed. The Russians, by the way, today, as Zelensky, so a Ukrainian president of Jewish heritage is speaking to the European Union. Putin is spouting off this nonsense about Ukrainians are all Nazis, right? And meanwhile, what did the Russians do? They bombed Babin Yar. That focal point of Jewish angst, of commemoration, of memory in Kyiv, where so many Jews and other Ukrainians were buried by the Nazis, bombed by today's Nazis. I mean, you go, like, how is that a military target? Now, I know there's some radio towers near there, but they can have pretty accurate targeting these days.
Yeah,
they're targeting civilians now. They bombed the hell out of Kharkiv yesterday, Ukraine's second largest city. It's a city I visited. I like Kharkiv, and I have friends. I have friends in Kharkiv, and they've killed a lot of civilians and done a lot of damage. And again, we're talking about Europe. We're talking about buildings that you can't replace in some cases because they're historic.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and then on the CBC this morning, they, of course, they had a couple of military experts, and that was the fear, is that now, because he's not having the success that he thought he was going to have, or it was going to be as easy as he thought he was going to have, he's going to start to ratchet up the really dirty, you know what I'm saying, in terms of the nasty warfare and
that's where the world can really help. If he starts doing that, then then I think there's an issue to be addressed, not only in the United Nations and the General Assembly, and perhaps in the Security Council, but also more broadly. That's when the world has to say, do we really want to see that happen? In World War II, and I've only heard this story, I'm not quite sure whether it's true or not, but at the end of the Second World War, after Stalin his forces had occupied all of Ukraine, there was talk that he was going to destroy the monastery complex of Pecherska Lavra in Kyiv. He was just going to level it. And apparently Charles de Gaulle said, "Don't do that." And it sort of stopped him, because it was that sense that there's some things you really shouldn't do, even if you're an atheist, even if you're a communist, even if you're a dictator. Putin, I say again, I don't think he is a fool, although his recent behavior seems almost deranged. As I say, this victory speech was released prematurely, and it exposes his mentality as this kind of guy who wants to be some kind of tsar. So in his final decades of his life, he wants to be king of some kind of Russian empire. Again, this is so 19th century. What is he thinking? The post-1991 generation of Russians, forget Ukrainians, has traveled. They vacation in the Mediterranean. They study in the Sorbonne. Some of them are living in Toronto running restaurants, right? These are people who are normal. They want to get married. They want to make some money. They want to have some vacations. They hope to preserve their health. They have grandchildren, all the good things that you and me and every Kingstonian watching this wants for their own selves and for their families. And now what do they have? War, death, agony, anger. For what? I keep saying, for what? For one man's perverse sense of what he deserves. He's going down in history as a bad guy, right? Nobody's going to remember him and say, well, he did great things. I mean, you can still make an argument for Napoleon. I mean, a lot of Brits and Belgians may, but Napoleon, rationalized the sewage system in Paris, divided France, did all sorts of stuff, right? Nobody's going to go, Adolf made the trains run on time. Nobody's like that's Adolf Hitler is a an evil person forever. Stalin is an evil person forever. Vladimir Putin does not come up to the level of a Stalin or a Hitler, but he's in that league. And
yeah, for sure. And he's left a legacy in his country of basically he's crippled it economically. He's never done anything for that country. He's raped and pillaged it for his entire tenure there, right? So to his own gain.
And to his own gain. And again, I was saying this to a friend of mine. Okay, so how many cars can you drive at once? How many houses can you sleep in at once? How many bottles of wine? Well, maybe that's wrong. How many bottles of wine can you drink at once? I suppose sequentially. But you know what I mean? It's like, what is that all for when there are people in your country that don't even have indoor plumbing? Mm-hmm. When there are people in your country who don't have basic medical care? When you could potentially be one of the great rich countries of the world? The resources of the of the Russian Federation are enormous, properly developed, properly managed. There could be wealth for all. Now, we both know that in that early post-Soviet 1991 period, everybody's going to grab a piece to take care of themselves. But there was a time in the mid-90s when people really thought that Russia could return to Europe and become normal and develop trade ties and develop its economy. And Russians would be, well, just like everybody else. You know, you like them, you don't like them, you like these people, you don't. But man, that dream has been squandered. And as you say, the country's been beggared, its neighbors have been butchered, and Russia has lost the war. Now, someone's going to say to me next week, yeah, but they managed to take Kharkiv and they got a land corridor to Crimea or something like that. They've lost the war in every important sense of the word, because one day, whether it's tomorrow or next week or next year or next decade, Putin will die. And all this is going to come back again. So the time is stop him now, get this over and done with, and start the rebuild. And I think what's going to happen as soon as this war comes to whatever end it comes to, there'll be an enormous amount of support for Ukraine in terms of rebuilding. And Ukraine will come back stronger. And a country of 45 million people will return to its rightful place in Europe, and Ukrainians will continue to contribute as they have. I mean, you think about Ukrainians in the last decade. What did you hear? Ukrainian soldiers rescuing Afghan refugees from the Taliban when all the others ran away. Okay, Ukrainians serving with Canadians as peacekeepers. Ukrainians in Yavory, where I was in Western Ukraine, teaching and learning from British, American, and Canadian troops about modern warfare, but also teaching them about what it's like. Ukrainians have contributed to peacekeeping missions around the world. Ukrainians have helped feed the world. Ukraine properly organized. And I'm not denying that there's some corruption. That it's not perfect. It's not perfect, but neither are you, neither am I, right?
No, places.
And look what happened in Canada recently. Are we perfect? Right? Look what happened in the United States on January 6th last year. Are they perfect? No. But who tries to escape to Russia or the People's Republic of China? Nobody. Who tries to get into the United States? Tens of hundreds of thousands. Who tries to get into Canada or the European Union? Tens of hundreds of thousands, millions every year. Why? Because this is as best a life as human beings can perhaps make on this earth. We try to create liberal democracies. They are not perfect. They have made historic mistakes. They have mistreated indigenous populations. They have done all sorts of things that were wrong. But we have a free press. You and I can have this conversation. I can criticize the current government, the last government, whatever. No one's going to arrest me in the next hour. We live in a reasonably free society. And it's not perfect, but compare it to the others. And I know there's this sense, the Americans. Well, all right. Would you rather live in Russia or in America? I have never met a Canadian who's anti-American who would say, well, I'll take Russia. No. None of them say that. Because, we got a big state next door to us, but it doesn't tell our parliament how to vote. There's an influence. Of course, there's an influence. We share the same language, the same culture in many respects. We share music. We share all sorts of stuff. But when Canada says, no, we're not joining you here in this war, you don't see the Americans from Fort Drum coming up here, a couple divisions to teach our parliament a lesson, right?
Exactly.
That's the nature of our democratic world. And, sorry, maybe you can see it just behind me. There's a little piece of luggage. That's all my parents had when they got off the boat in 1949. And look at me now, I'm a professor. My sister was a principal of a grade school. We've contributed to our community, to Canadian society more broadly. Why? Because our parents were given a chance. I just never thought, frankly, that at this age in my life, stage in my life, I would now be helping Ukrainian refugees just as my parents were helped by other Ukrainian Canadians who were here before them. I was at Queen's University last night talking to students from St. Lawrence College and from Queen's who are Ukrainian students studying here. Their parents sent them abroad to get an education, to better themselves, to be better Ukrainians of the 21st century. Now they're cut off and they're worried, they're anxious. So we've actually, with Mayor Patterson's help and the support of Mark Gerritsen and Ian Arthur, so apolitical, nonpartisan, we're going to actually start a fund to raise money to help these students, pay their tuition, meet their accommodation costs, and so on, until things sort out. I know the federal government's going to be extending their visas. I know that many Kingstonians are looking for ways to help these kids. We want to help Ukraine, so there are all sorts of organizations helping Ukraine. But what about the kids in our own backyard, right? Yeah, they need help too. And frankly, I hadn't thought of them until Ms. Koala, Sophie Koala, got in touch with me, and Laura Coldwell from St. Lawrence and said, "Hey, we got some students. Can you talk to them? They're scared. They don't know what to do." And I went, "Wow." So the Ukrainian-Canadian Club of Kingston, Beth Israel Synagogue, the mayor have all stepped up. And again, Brian Patterson, great guy. He told us last night that City Hall for the month of March will be lit up every night in the blue and yellow national colors of Ukraine to show solidarity. I mean, that's the city I live in. I mean, Brian's a colleague of mine at RMC. That's kind of almost, nice. But what a city. Yeah. What a country, what a society we live in. Well, and I heard Bob Ray when he was interviewed on the weekend, but Canada is the largest populace of Ukrainians outside of the Ukraine, I guess, right? 1.4 million Canadians are of Ukrainian heritage. But, again, when people say to me, "Oh, you've got a strong, powerful lobby," look, I'm on the inside. I can tell you we don't, okay? What we have is a large number of people who say, "I'm of Ukrainian heritage and I care." But all my life, I've met people like you. I've met all sorts of Canadians from many different backgrounds: Italians, Jewish, Chadians, Muslims from Iran, so on. And I've talked to them about who I am. They ask me, "Why do you have that funny name? How did you get a name like Lubomyr Luciuk in Kingston, Ontario?" Oh, Lord, thank you, Mom and Dad. And so I've told them who I am. When I was a boy, people said there's no such thing as Ukraine. Now, I almost wish there wasn't. I don't mean that, but you know what I mean? It's like all I can think of, all I hear. In all those years, all those decades that I've taught, that I've interacted with my fellow Canadians, that I've dated Irish girls or dated Italian girls, whatever, they know who I am. And now, wow, in the last couple of days, people I haven't seen in 50 years have reached out and said, "What can I do? I pray for Ukraine. How can I support Ukraine? I remember what you told me. I remember, your passion for this. I used to dance in the Ukrainian Maka dance ensemble that Nadia Luciuk organized. I remember your parents. I remember folklore. And these people are all coming out and saying, what can we do to help?" So the answer is pray for Ukraine, contribute to those humanitarian funds that are going to help provide important relief and resettlement supplies for Ukrainians. And of course, don't forget that Ukraine is still fighting against the aggressor. Ukraine did not invade Russia. Russia invaded Ukraine. Yeah. So I'm gonna turn that conversation to Zelensky. Here's a guy, a lawyer, and then most recently a political satirist who actually, didn't he have some kind of comedy routine where he was actually, or in a play that he was portraying exactly what he's doing now? He was he was a part of a TV series about a kind of a bumpkin who was portraying the presidency, and and he gets, and then or he was pretending, and then he got elected. So that's what happened in life, wow. And he was very successful, very funny. I was actually watching a skit that he did a long time ago, which I won't share the details with your viewers because it was a bit of a crude skit, but pretty funny. Let's just say he was playing the piano, but not with his hands. Okay, fair enough. And he had wealth. He was very successful in Russia. He was a Russian speaker. He's of Jewish heritage. And then he realized that after 2014 that no, something's not working here. So he came back to Ukraine. And that cost him personally. And then he ran for office, and he ran against a good president. President Poroshenko, I met. Good man, patriot. But Zelensky won over 70% of the popular vote. So again, when Putin goes on about Ukrainians are Nazis, right? So these Nazis voted in a Jewish president, right?
Yeah,
like
exactly.
The only other state in the world that has a president who's Jewish is Israel, right?
Yeah.
And we not only had a president, but we had a prime minister and now the minister of defense. So come on, that's there were tensions in the past. There's no doubt about it. But like, am I going to go back to World War I now and start worrying about that?
But he seems to be emerging as a very good leader now, and he's showing his.
I looked around.
Mettle.
Yeah, I looked around a week ago. When I was listening to President Biden going on about prices at the gas pumps, and I was thinking to myself, man, if that's the biggest issue in the United States, come on, people are dying, and you're talking about the price of gas, right? I get it. There's a domestic constituency he has to appeal to. When I saw it first, Prime Minister Trudeau saying, we're going to basically send them blankets, and I'm thinking, whoa, or the Germans, well, we're sending 5,000 helmets. Now Germany changed overnight the other day, as you know, just after I wrote a piece that was in the Whig Standard criticizing them for doing nothing. So I think I changed that policy. Yeah, right. I'm sure they were all reading it. I was distressed. I was thinking, wow, we're not doing enough. But Zelensky has risen to the occasion. The world is seeing it. And again, as I say, just the other day when the threat to Kyiv loomed from the north, the Americans literally offered to fly Zelensky, who's target number one. He's on lists. He's on a list of people the Russians want to assassinate. And they said, we'll get your wife and children out. We'll fly you, to the United States and in exile. And Zelensky's answer was, I don't need transportation. I need ammunition. Okay. Yeah. Now, compare and contrast that with Putin, who ran away to a bunker in the Urals.
Yeah.
Like, why? First of all, Ukraine has no missiles that can reach Moscow anyway. Why do you have to hide in the Urals in a bunker? What? Meanwhile, President Zelensky is staying put in Kyiv, and Russian disinformation, Russian propaganda, he's run away. So what does he do? He stands in front of the Verkhovna Rada, in front of parliament, with key members of his parliament. They've got timestamped documents. They're saying, we're right here. We're right here. I mean, God protect him. Godspeed to his soldiers, give them strength. But, if he dies, he will die in office in Ukraine, and he will be remembered as one of the great presidents, one of the great leaders of a free Ukraine forever. Mm-hmm. And that, too, speaks to the 21st century. It speaks to going forward. As I said, this post-1991 generation was born in freedom, is not socialized in the Soviet mentality. So I used to tell my students this story. People would ask me, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, why isn't Ukraine normal now like the rest of Europe? And I said, look, think of the good book, think of the Bible, the Old Testament. Moses leads his people out of Egyptian bondage, and they're heading to the promised land. Well, if you look at a map, the distance from Egypt to Israel, Palestine, whatever you want to call it, is not a 40-year walk, even if you take your time. Now, some people that have heard me give this speech go, well, he's a man, he refused to ask for directions. but the reality of it is, the good book tells us that they wandered around in the desert until that whole generation that had born in Europe, in Egyptian captivity had died off. So even Moses himself could only sit on the mountain and look down into the promised land. Remember? So yes, what does this tell us? The people who were born in the Soviet period could never really create a free society. It takes 40 years. It takes at least a generation plus. And that, my friend, is 2034.
Wow.
So that was always my prediction. And what I've seen, there have been officers coming to Fort Frontenac over the last several years until the pandemic. And the last two were both post-1991 born. Both had seen combat on the Eastern Front against the Russians. Both were coming to study at RMC. They studied really hard. And when I talked to them, unlike their predecessors from, say, 10 years before that, very different, very European, very professional. They were all patriots, but these most recent ones were clearly psychologically, spiritually, morally, however you want to describe it, were a different species of Ukrainian. I'm so glad, my friend, that I've lived to see this. Come what may, Ukraine, the national anthem is Shchenev Merel Ukraine. Ukraine has not died. It's not going to die.
Wow. So I won't keep you too much longer. because we know Putin is delusional. And I've had this conversation the last couple of days with people, and I said, the CIA must be in overdrive figuring out how to assassinate this guy. And I said, the only way it can happen is they got to turn one of his inner circle, like you said, and somebody's got to put a bullet in his head. But it's a suicide mission. But given his derangement and his delusion, how real should we take this nuclear threat that he's sort of suggested, I guess?
That's the bluff of a buffoon. Look, he's not suicidal.
Fair enough, but he's probably got a bunker the size of whatever underneath the Kremlin, doesn't he?
Of course he has. But do you think all his oligarch friends have? Do you think all his generals and commanding officers, the people who have to actually push the buttons, you think they're all suicidal? And do you think they're going to die for Putin? No. That whole system is held together by corruption, by access to wealth and resources and travel and bank accounts and, foreign properties and foreign yachts and foreign women and all that kind of stuff. I mean, that's the reality of it. It's a great criminal conspiracy that has robbed the Russian nation of not only its prestige in the world, but of its ties to the world and of its potential for becoming a normal state. He's destroyed all that. Are you going to be the colonel or some bunker or some general who says, oh, yeah, I'll die so I can keep Putin in power if it comes to that? And don't forget, the United States and its allies are vastly, vastly superior in their ability to defend and destroy the Russian Federation, should they ever wish to. But nobody does. Nobody, NATO didn't expand toward Russia to try to intimidate it. All of those countries, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, countries of the former Warsaw Pact, Poland, and so on, fled to the West. The direction is the other way. People are going the other way. Nobody says, oh, I want to go back to Russia. Nobody. They're all going the other way. So even though we might have governments in Hungary or in Poland where there are some leaders with, right-wing ideas that we don't share, the reality of it is none of those countries want to go back to the old days. And when Putin says, well, I want to push everything back to the way it was in 1991, good luck. Good luck. It's just not going to happen. And the nuclear bluff is just that. Putin, I don't think, has the authority or the support to do that. I just, most of the officers in the nuclear forces of any country that has that power are very smart people. They're loyal, they're obedient, but they also can think. These aren't automated.
Yeah, so in saying that then, where does this conflict have to get to for them to finally grow some you-know-what and take control and really have a coup inside, you know what I'm saying, and do it from within? Because
that I can't say, but I've been saying for years it's about time the Russians had a real revolution. Because what they had in 1917 was a coup. Lenin and a small group of people took power and brutally held on to power until 1991 with, some particularly horrific episodes like the Stalinesque period and the Holodomor in Ukraine and so on. But the reality of it is that I think it's going to be up to the Russians to decide how they want to go forward after this. I think, frankly, and, good riddance, Putin has to die. I think that's why he's becoming increasingly sort of deranged, because he realizes that, he may, as the Globe and Mail said, he's still got lots of paint, but he's painted himself into a corner. And at some point, the morale of his invaders, of his invading armies, will collapse because they're not doing very well. And they're encountering people who are determined to resist. So the friends of mine that I was talking to the other day in Kyiv, another couple, both showed me their Kalashnikovs, both showed me their ready Molotov cocktails. So do you want to be the Ivan walking down the Khreshchatyk in Kyiv when every other window's got a machine gun pointed at your head? Yeah. I don't think so. This is people don't recognize that Ukraine is a country larger than France. If you exclude the Russian Federation, which is huge, of course, but if you just think of Ukraine, it's the largest state in Europe. The Soviets in the post-World War period encountered a Ukrainian resistance in Western Ukraine, in the tiny Western section of Ukraine. It took them a decade to suppress it, and they never suppressed the ideals of that movement. Now they've got a whole country the size of France first of all, they can't military occupy it. And even if they could never hold it, because every other Tom, Dick, and Harry, or I suppose I should say Ivan, Maria, and Petrol, has got a Kalashnikov and is going to kill you. And, like, what soldier wants to be in that? And particularly when they're going to hear from people, what are you doing here?
Yeah.
Get out. There was a wonderful video clip of an older Ukrainian woman, and she was handing out sunflower seeds to Russian soldiers. And of course, they're looking at her. She's a babushka, right? As we might say. Yep. She's an old lady. Yep. You're not going to hurt her. She's giving them sunflower seeds because there's an old Ukrainian curse. And it basically says, take a few seeds so that when we bury you, the sunflowers will sprout. It's not nice, but it's that kind of, and they got it. They know what she's saying. It's like, you're going to be buried here, son. Get out. Go home. Yeah. Go home. Be with your mother. Get out. And again, I don't know how the war will go. It may escalate still. There may be even greater brutality. But from my point of view, if you're looking to define victory, it will elude Putin now. Period. He has lost. He has lost. He has not intimidated Ukraine, partially because of the Ukrainians and their resistance, partially because the West finally stepped up to some degree.
Yes, absolutely.
It's a combination.
Well, listen, we'll leave it there. I really, really appreciate your time because I know you've got a busy schedule and everything, and I really appreciate the enlightenment, the context, and all the information. It brings everything top of mind, and I greatly appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Take care.